So without further ado, I am delighted to introduce Julia Alvarez tonight to discuss her book, Afterlife, as a part of our Read the Day event series, which is a partnership between Bank Square Books and The Day. Julia will be in conversation with Rick Koster, a reporter for The Day. So for those of you that don't know, Julia Alvarez is the author of 6 novels, 3 books of nonfiction, 3 collections of poetry, and 11 books for children and young adults. She has taught and mentored writers in schools and communities across America, and until her retirement in 2016, she was a writer in residence at Middlebury College. Her work has garnered wide recognition, including a Latino Leader Award in Literature from the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute, the Hispanic Heritage Award in Literature, and the Woman of the Year by Latina magazine. Her book, In the Time of Butterflies, which incidentally I wrote a paper on in college, it's beautiful, not my paper, the book. In the Time of the Butterflies, with over 1 million copies in print, was selected by the National Endowment for Arts for its National Big Read program. And finally, in 2013, President Barack Obama awarded Alvarez the National Medal of Arts in recognition of her extraordinary storytelling. And Rick Koster is also joining us tonight. He has been working as an arts and culture writer for The Day for over 20 years. He specializes in covering music, books, and dining, and writes a weekly humor column known as Rick's List. His pieces have appeared in the Dallas Observer, Houston Press, Offbeat, and American Way. And he is the author of 3 books. And he told me to say this. I wasn't going to, because I think it's very self-deprecating. And he should have pride in his work, but he says that they are the worst selling books of all time. I'm sure he will tell us more about that in just a minute. So Julia and Rick are going to talk for about 25 to 30 minutes, and then we will open it up to your questions that have been submitted to the Q&A button. So I know you're tired of hearing from me. I'm going to ask our wonderful panelists to turn their cameras on and unmute themselves. Hi, Rick. I did it. I said it.
Well, hi there, Stephanie.
Hi. Hello, Julia. Welcome. I'm going to turn the event over to you, and then I will reappear towards the end when we're ready for those audience questions. Okay?
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Of course.
And hello, Julia. Again, we spoke last week before an article that I wrote that appeared in The Day, and
thank you. It was a wonderful article. I'm very. My agent sent me the link, and it was so generous and big-hearted of you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I just felt like I had sort of, if it came out and read well, I'm glad, because it seemed like we just spun off in a conversation, and it was maybe not, I didn't get maybe the best material I could, not because it was your fault, because I was just having so much fun talking to you. So thank you for that.
I think you did just fine.
Okay, good. Let me say, you know what I'm going to say real quickly? I apologize for my hair. I haven't cut my hair, everybody, and I'm doing it for a charity thing. Not that I think anybody will spend a lot of money to see me get a haircut, except now that they have seen my hair, they probably would pay a lot. But anyway, that's enough of that. I just didn't want people to think you were talking to Jerry Garcia or something. So, okay, Julia, thank you for writing Afterlife. It is a wonderful, wonderful book.
Thank you.
What I want to, would you like to maybe tell folks that haven't read it yet or are curious maybe a little bit about the plot, or would you rather I did it? Sometimes I get a little nervous because I don't want to give away too much when the author might not want me to, but.
Well, I could give a brief capsule, but I always feel like a summary is, it just, it gives the illusion that you have gotten what a book is about. And so much of a book is the experience of reading it and becoming these others and other characters and traveling through it and writing the rhythm of the prose and the voice. So it just only like takes out a little piece of it. and might even misrepresent it going forward. But it is basically a novel that I think is very much of our time, even though it was written before the pandemic, because it's about what do we do when our world falls apart, and how do we survive the worst that can happen to us with humor and generosity and love and hope. And so it tells the story of Antonia, recently retired. And this isn't a spoiler alert. On the first page, there's a terrible accident as she's about to meet her husband for a celebratory dinner because of her retirement. And all of a sudden she finds herself a widow. And, she's trying very hard to manage her grief, which is deep and vibrant. And, she's afraid it's going to throw her over. And she tries to be very, disciplined about it, and avail herself of all the things she's read, because she's retired from being a teacher for many decades, knows all these wonderful books and lives by them, and suddenly has to deal with life doesn't stop because of grief. It has to deal with the challenge of undocumented young pregnant girl that she finds in her garage, and the disappearance of her sister, who's bipolar. And it's about how she has to come to terms with the fact that even if she's in grieving, life has come knocking at her door. And how does she avail herself of the things that she has been teaching when it's not in the abstract, beautiful literature and words, but it's actually a real problem and person at her door. So it's exploring that landscape of elderhood, of grief, of resilience, hope, generosity, community. I guess the
No,
cliff
that's
notes.
beautiful.
No, the cliff notes would totally throw that explanation out, but that's what happens when you try to summarize a novel.
Exactly. Okay, I thought that was a very nice summation, and I want to comment immediately, because you said at the top that you're worried that a summation might preclude the enjoyment of the literary experience of reading it, the rhythm of the prose, etc., and how it develops. And when I think about Antonia, for all I know, Julia, you had 200 type single space pages of 4 generations of background for her before you ever wrote one word of the novel. But I don't believe that, because there's such an instinctual quality to her. The way she reacts to these situations, there's nothing to me that seems like you had it all in mind and planned out. I felt like I was in a small canoe with Antonia going down a whitewater river, and she keeps coming up on these horrible curves or rocks or whatever. And I was just damn glad she was steering the boat, because I knew she was facing stuff that was awful, but she was doing what was in her heart and her mind, and reacting. And I felt so comfortable with her, even though she may not have been comfortable with herself. Does any of that resonate with you at all in terms of how you developed her?
Oh my goodness, one of my challenges in writing this book, and something I've always wanted to do, because I'm naturally, I have that Latin, florid, rococo, a way of telling a story and using language. And I've always admired these short poetic novels. And it's like the haiku, it looks simple, but it's so hard to get there. Pascal made that famous quote that's been ascribed to everyone else, but it's, had I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter. the hardest thing is to put it together into a compact, uh, quick moving story. And yet I didn't want to, with that efficiency and economy, to lose depth and profundity. And that is, for me, the astonishing thing that a haiku does. It just gives a vision of the world in 3 short lines, using the senses, using a little bright example that really opens up into a huge world. So that was my challenge with Antonia. So a lot of revision. You write, and maybe the first rush of inspiration, you just let everything come. But then the process of revision is going back over the manuscript. And as I used to tell my students who didn't want to take anything out, I would say, revision is about reading your work as if someone else had written it. So you see where the extraneous is. I want it to be a lean novel that in a way reflected the themes of the novel. How do you live in a diminished world, and not close down, open up to the larger version of yourself. So in a sense, that's what I wanted for my Antonia. I didn't know if she was going to get there, but through the process of writing and rewriting and revision, you figure out, the Mayan weavers have a prayer before they sit before their looms to weave, and they don't have a pattern. They don't work with a pattern. It's just, what the fibers are telling them, what is allowing, all of these things. And their prayer is, grant me the intelligence and the patience to find the true pattern. And then they begin to weave. So I think that's a perfect prayer for a writer engaged in writing a novel. Grant me the intelligence and the patience to find the true pattern.
Let me ask you this. It's kind of a 2-part question, just based on what you just told us. You said that you have the authorial tendencies of a Latin writer. And we talked about this last week. People like yourself, Isabel Allende, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Jimenez, lush, beautiful prose stylists. You've got that in spades. And then you set out to write a shorter novel. I am so impressed that it is still beautiful prose. At the same time, I think about this all the time, Julia. We are in a world now where the attention span of people is biologically getting shorter and shorter. We have evolved or devolved, or however you want. And was that on your mind at all? And you did very successfully write a shorter novel that is still beautifully written, but were you aware of that tendency that people don't have the attention span they used to?
Well, actually, I'm trying to remember the name of the book. I know the title, Reader Come Home, and I believe her last name is Wolf. And it's a nonfiction book, and it's about how the internet and devices are affecting the way we read, the way we think, are actually changing the structure of our brains. And
Right.
it's a real advocacy. The writer says, we can't turn the tide, but it also is a real advocate, the book is, for also continuing to read and teaching kids to get off devices and actually read books and slow down, because it's a whole way we integrate things when we read that is lost when everything is speeded up. And so that book really, I read it because I have been aware in my own life how my attention span is so scattered. So I think we're all in this learning curve together of how to integrate this technology. And we can't just, go back and say, oh, we've got to go back and get rid of the devices, because they're also useful. and they connect us. Look at how we're coming together here and this
Right.
past year. But at the same time, how do we integrate what are the pluses of it with what were the pluses of a slower, more reflective way of reading, of connecting, of thinking. So I am very aware of that readers might not be as patient as as they used to be. But I think that for us that come from Latin cultures, it's not just that it's a style we've developed, it's part of the culture. You know, it's storytelling, our roots, well, all storytelling are in the oral tradition where you told it in community, you told a story in community with people adding their asides and their tangents and their, so that it became a sort of organic, huge combining of things, very much reflective of our flora and fauna, you know, flowers, everything blooming. So I think that, you know, it is part of oral storytelling, which is still, which I think Latin cultures, Latin American cultures are still closer to than maybe North American cultures are. Not Native
Okay.
Americans, definitely, or many African American communities and cultures are still very enmeshed in oral storytelling.
I wonder if I've been thinking, and you alluded to that you had been working on Afterlife before the pandemic, but I wonder when you write, and this, and you know, so many of the audiences that are generous enough to take part in our Read of the Day series are either writers themselves or would like to be, and are interested in the nuances of the publishing business or just how it all works. And I wanted to ask you a writerly question. Um, you know, you've written several novels, books of essays, 3 poetry collections, several titles for children and young adults. What do you know? Do you have a list of what's going to be next, or what might happen that occurs to you to say, well, you know what, now's the time to write something and it would become Afterlife? And I wondered if that might be the case because of what we as a country have been through, not just with the pandemic, which you said came after, but how divided we were over the last 5 years. Does that resonate at all with what you were thinking?
Well, you know, Rick, I wish I could say that I was really so, you know, that I could really call the shots in this writerly
Yeah,
life.
yeah,
Unfortunately, I can't. I can tell you that the way ideas, they never come as ideas. If an idea came to my door, I would never open my door. It's usually, it's usually like, in Spanish, we have a wonderful word called inquietud, a discomfort. An image I like to use is a pebble in my shoe. Something gets into my head, something I see, something I hear about, something I see, some issue that I just can't put it aside. It becomes kind of obsessive. And I think that the books that I write are ways not of answering any questions or giving readers any message, but for a way for me to unpack, you know, to untie that shoe and try to get that pebble out, to try to understand, to try to make meaning out of that quandary. So with Afterlife, I had actually been working and still returned to this huge novel that was just, I couldn't find my way how to, so many drafts of it. I couldn't find a way to shape it. And I just got so frustrated. I put it aside. And Afterlife actually came quickly in comparison to what I was tussling with. But it had very much to do with several issues that were very much on my mind. As you mentioned, pre-pandemic, but the pandemic was already seeds in the ground. By that, I mean, we were already going through these times of loss, what I call elegiac times, times where we were witnessing the end of so many things, with climate change, with storms, the divisiveness of our civil life, violence in the schools, violence against communities of color, draconian immigration laws, so many things, so many losses. So that in a sense, Antonia was a way to bring it personal. She has a personal loss, but then added losses come on that bring in some of these issues in very concrete form. And part of it was that I was wanting to understand and make meaning of these times we were living in. And I also was very interested in, now that I'm 71, I'm very interested in elders, because I saw, I really want to be an elder, because not everybody becomes an elder. Many people just get old. But what does it mean to be an elder? How do the things that you've learned in your craft, in your calling, in your life, how do you use those in service to your community? And with me, it's through storytelling. But, I was very interested in older protagonists. And I felt like that was a gap in the shelf. I yearned and ached and read, picked up any novel that had an elder in it, not as a, sort of peripheral character, but I was interested in what does it mean to be an elder in your community. So all these things, and it's not like they all come to me in these really analytical ways. It's things that are in my atmosphere, in my heart, in my mind, and so they sort of slowly come together through many drafts and attempts to sort of handle these things with language and character and plot.
I would think that in that process, which is a blessing, that those who write get to use those means to get through stuff like that. I don't know that a writer always gets the answers through the process, but it's certainly, I would think, a therapeutic thing to go through, to at least have the opportunity to get to the end of a book and say, well, you know what, I thought about a lot of this stuff. And I want to ask you, Julia, you have written extensively about immigration. You have written about the environment. Another recurring motif or theme that I am fascinated by is the idea and nuances of sisterhood. And tell me a little bit about that. Have you learned what have you learned about sisterhood, not just in your own life, but maybe as a sort of a bridge to humanity itself, if that makes any sense?
Yeah. First of all, I had to sort of laugh inside. As you mentioned, it's probably therapeutic. You're probably right. I tell Bill when he says, are you ever gonna stop writing? Are you ever just gonna, have fun with me? And first of all, I tell him, this is how I have my fun. But also I said, you don't want me to stop writing. You would not want Julia Alvarez without her focusing on this work that, sort of is a way of dealing with what I call the furies, the duende, that energy that can be destructive. That biblical thing from the Gnostic Gospels, if you bring forth what is inside you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is inside you will destroy you. And I can vouch to that. But on any given day, is it therapeutic? It's terrible. It's messy. It's a struggle. It's like, what the heck do I think I'm doing? I don't know how to do this, because each book you have to learn how to write that book. So you go back to beginner's mind. And, and it's not a guarantee that the last book you wrote got written or that it was good, that you're going to be able to do it again. So it also is anxiety producing. But back to sisters, the same way. It's messy. It's anxiety producing. It's sisterhood, and I don't think of it as just blood sisters. Although that I did grow up in a family of all girls, and so sisterhood is the way I sort of understand reality. It's in that community, especially because we were growing up in a very patriarchal and very machista time, especially in the 50s in the DR under a dictatorship. The sisterhood was the untold story. It was women coming together and connecting and empowering each other and accompanying each other. So that's always been really important to me. First, those silenced voices, but also the women's perspective. So that when I wrote In the Time of the Butterflies, already some books have been written and novels about the dictatorship, but always from the male point of view. And I was interested, what was the dictatorship like for the women? Especially since we had a predator of a dictator who exercised droit de seigneur. If he liked a woman, she had to be comply and had to be brought over to him. So it was really a kind of feeling under siege. And yet it was three sisters, the Mirabar sisters, who started the underground against the dictator. And that their husbands were on the masthead, so to speak, because they were afraid that if it was women, the men would not join because they didn't want a woman telling them what to do. So Minerva complied and let her husband, Manolo Tavares, be the leader. But it's amazing to me. So these stories that circulate are important to me. And I think sisters are one metaphor for that connection and community among women and the stories that they tell each other. Usually back in the kitchen, as they were quilting, as they were baking. It didn't get on the written page maybe, but those stories are rich and we have to access them and tell them.
In another sense, maybe I'm trying too hard here to segue from what you just said, but I've always thought of teachers as sort of obviously mentors, but I learned a lot from teachers that were more anecdotal, if that makes any sense, than just read chapter so and so. And I wonder, in your time as a teacher, do you see how many times have you run across a student where you said, oh my gosh, this person really has the gift, who can really write? I don't know whether is that something you feel like you should say, hey, I don't want to step across boundaries here, but you really need to do this? Or do you have to sit back and have you followed any of their careers sort of from afar? Does that make sense?
Oh my gosh. Now after 4 decades of teaching, I have so many wonderful former students who are my teachers. They're great writers. And I would say most of them, I saw it in them. And I think that's my job as a teacher, to nurture the
Right.
seeds. My job as a teacher, I never thought of making everybody into a writer, but the things that reading and writing allow for make better human beings, as far as I'm concerned. And that's what I was most interested in. A student connecting with their passion when I was their advisor. If they were in my writing class, that you would almost guess that was their passion. So my job was not to turn them into clones of myself, but to connect them with their voice and the thing, and that not just me being their teacher, because I think our best teachers are other writers that we read, whose work we read, and they might not even be alive. But I would see something and I would say, oh, read the story by Carson McCullers. I think you might find some affinity. And it's sort of like you're trying to teach them that there are many tools on this wall of writing, and that there's this one that exists, and that one, try this, try that. And sometimes students were so afraid, they didn't want to imitate, they wanted to be unique. And I would say, don't worry about that. That's like worrying, like if you shake someone's hand, your fingerprints will be lost. Your fingerprints are so unique. It's like your voice. But the thing is, you get in the way often of that voice. And you worry that if you reach out and to other writers and read, that you might lose it. It's still going to be there. But those writers are your teachers. Those writers are part of your DNA that will make up that fingerprint. But you don't have to worry, because your fingerprint, there's none on your voice. No one else is going to have that voice once you connect with it.
That's a wonderful answer. And I wish you had been teaching writing where I went to school, but that's okay. Speaking of education, we're sitting here in Bank Square Books in the day, New London. Now, you graduated elsewhere, but you spent a couple of years in New London at Connecticut College. Do you think back on those years? Because you won a couple of poetry prizes here, but did you enjoy your time in New London? Did you like Conn College?
I did. I had the good luck of having Bill Meredith, the poet,
Sure.
my teacher. He was wonderful. And then he went away
Yeah.
for a semester, and June Jordan, the African-American poet, though she has written prose as well. She passed away a few years back, but was my teacher. Very different from Bill Meredith. Wonderful, inspiring teacher. And I think she was sort of the first one. There was no such thing as multicultural literature, Latino literature, ethnic literature back then. But she really encouraged me, and was delighted when I would write out of my Dominican background, rather than trying to sound like I came from Connecticut, like another John Cheever, that I had my own voice. And she really encouraged that. And winning the poetry prize at Connecticut College, there was a dean there who had gone to Middlebury. And so it was all her fault. She told me about the Breadloaf the Breadloaf Writers Conference. And she said, I think you will enjoy the Writers Conference, because you'll be surrounded with other people who are just as passionate about writing. So I did. I applied and I got in. 19 years old, I came up here and I thought I had died and gone to heaven. All these writers, passionate, talking about writing. And that's when I decided I wanted to transfer to Middlebury College. So it's all the dean's fault. But I made some great friends, and I had some great teachers there.
Wonderful. Well, you did the right thing. I think we can all agree on that. So, Stephanie, I tell you what, I'm looking at the clock here and I see we got some questions. So I'm wondering if maybe we should welcome our guests in and take part of it. And just on my behalf, Julia, thank you. That was just, your answers are just so charming and smart. And thank you for indulging me.
And long-winded and rococo, like Latin American novels. But
I thought you were talking about me.
No. I do have something to say. First of all, I don't know about you cutting your hair. I think it's like a silver halo, and number two, when I was a little girl, the women in the family said, don't ever cut your hair. You just let your hair grow, because it's an investment. And this is why women then would buy hair pieces. First, women, we didn't even use the term first world, but people paid money to cut off your melena and sell it because they would make hair pieces, buns for women. So, so think of it as an investment to let it grow.
Okay.
I mean, someone might want to buy up a head of silver hair.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry. Not very
Well, we have had a couple of questions come in, and I think just through your conversation, you have answered parts of them, but I might ask you to, or I might just kind of draw you out on a couple of them. So let's see. So Carly has chatted in and has said, "Hi, thank you for being such a great role model. I was wondering if you have any advice for young Latino writers who feel underrepresented in the world of literature. How have you been able to use and embrace your identity in your writing in a productive way?"
Well, first of all, thank you for that question, Carly. And, I can't say that I made a conscious effort to engage with my Latina identity, because as I was saying about the fingerprints, what else was I going to write about? This is who I was, these were my stories. But you're right that it has been a struggle. I was writing for about 23 years or so before How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accents was published, and I was already 41. And I had been writing and writing. I had the good luck of pieces coming together. I had a wonderful agent. She's since semi-retired, Susan Burkholz, and she really believed in this literature. Sandra Cisneros was one of her clients, as was Ana Castillo, as was Denise Chavez. And she was mentoring other writers along the way, Latinx writers. And I think her pluck and her believing in this literature really opened the doors of mainstream publishers. And she sent Garcia Girls out to about 13, I think she only told me of about 13, but since then she's told me it was a lot more, and we're all getting rejected. And finally, and that's why I've stayed with my little Algonquin Books, not so little anymore, publisher, because this small publisher, Algonquin Books of Chapel Hill, Shannon Ravenel, who was my editor then, read the manuscript and decided to give me a chance. And so it was that and that the zeitgeist, the publishing world zeitgeist, had become really interested in writers of color, Latinx writers, Latin American writers were the big boom. And I think that also was happening in the culture. So I think it was a combination of things. I have lived long enough to be a viejita in this craft. And so I see how much more inclusive that publishing world is. But that doesn't mean that it is really truly representative of our population and our communities in this country. But that's all the more reason to keep, not just for yourself, but for others, to keep opening the path, abriendo caminos, we say. So, I think publishers, editors are much more open now and than they were when I got started. And so it's important to keep going. And also as you go to find, it was so important for me to find Sandra Cisneros and Denise and Ana, Elena Maria Viramontes, Acheri Moraga, because it gave me a sense that I was not alone in the struggle. And we need that because it's so easy to lose heart. So I think finding communities of other writers and other writers of color can be really affirming to a young writer who is feeling, like unheard, and that this will never happen for them.
Right. That is so beautifully said. I'll just leave it at that. That's beautiful. So another question we've received, and I'm going to combine these two. So Susan has said, older protagonists have a wealth of experience to share. And I think you touched on this earlier. And yet the publishing world discourages writers from telling their stories. There are so many protagonists in their 30s and 40s when many readers are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. Can you comment about this? And then Irene has kind of tagged on to Susan's comment and has said, as we age, it's natural to lose friends and loved ones. My favorite quote from your book, the natural progression of things, natural or not, it still leaves a hole in the heart. Please comment.
Yeah, well, I think it's so obvious from the previous question. It's become so obvious and glaring when we see certain voices and communities left out of the circle of storytelling. And we become very sensitive to it. But then there are also these other populations that might not be as apparent, but become very apparent as you enter that demographic, an older protagonist, and not just an airbrushed older protagonist, not just the abuelita, the purple hat and red scarf, zany lady, or, not a flattened version, but as complicated and as passionate and as questioning as any young protagonist. And I think it's important for us. Why? Because for one thing, we read to feel accompanied. And as we enter our older years and as we experience losses, it's not that these protagonists or novels will take away the hole in the heart, but we feel, like I said before, even if you have a community of other writers of color to be your community as going forward, we also need that with books that we read, that accompaniment that comes from reading. And hey, as one of my friends says, when she's an older friend and she's walking the beach with another older friend, and they're in their bathing suits and things are sagging, and it is in an airbrush body, and they might hear. She once heard these two young women kind of sort of commenting and giggling, and she turned around and all she said was, "Tick tock."
Oh,
You won't be there someday. So, these older protagonists, it might seem like, who wants to read about them? Hey, you're going to be there. And wouldn't it be nice to have to have it somewhat a known territory for you? And I've always been interested in writing to absences on the shelf. So when I'm missing a kind of book, I want to then, figure out what is that story, because that silence it invites me to fill it with story. So, so yes, I think it's important, so important. And by the way, I have since discovered so many books that have become favorites, that have older protagonists.
would you mind listing some of those out?
Well, Stuart Onan, who's a wonderful writer, has one called Emily Alone. It's a beautiful book. Reading Turgenev, which is a novella by William Trevor, is a wonderful book. The Marilyn Robinson books, Gilead, of an older man leaving behind his legacy. There's, Gloria Naylor's Mama Day. A woman, a spirit woman, a woman that knows stories and communicates with the spirit world. There's, oh my goodness, so many, and of course, when you ask me, they fly out the.
Right.
There's a wonderful book by Flaubert, A Simple Heart. But that you follow a life, but ends in an elderly, beautiful culmination. I'm also now interested in novels written from the point of view of the dead. So that's what I'm reading.
Oh, right.
Neil Guy. So that's really old, right? That's a new frontier.
The next step, yeah.
The next step. So
well, there have been a couple of books recently that have come out that are kind of like towing the line between life and death too, or that the kind of the passing of from life to death. I think of what is it? I don't Elif. I can't remember the name. The seconds. It's like 9 seconds and
yes.
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 It's like the last couple of seconds of her life, and the entire book is about that.
That's a wonderful, and she's a Turkish,
yes,
Turkish British writer.
Elif Shafak.
I know it's so hard.
If I'm pronouncing that correct. 10 minutes, 38 seconds in this strange world is the name of that book.
It is a beautiful, amazing story. It really is. And there's a Catalan Street and again, I'm really interested in all these European writers that are just being translated into English. Not the 9 seconds, because she actually wrote it in
right.
English. But it's by Magda Swabo.
Okay.
Who wrote The Door. That's the one that became very famous. But Catalan Street, you don't realize at the beginning, so subtly is it done, that one of the points of view is from wherever we go when we have the afterlife. So that's a beautiful, and Neil Gaiman's The Graveyard book is also wonderful. And George Saunders, Lincoln in the Bardo. That's a wonderful book as well. So amazing. There are books about the next stage too.
Right. For those of you watching, I might go back at the end of this and try to make a list of all these and possibly put that in the description link in the YouTube link that will be available.
Stephanie, and I can get those to you as well.
Oh, that would be a big help too.
That isn't,
Sure. Well, those are lots of excellent recommendations. So just in the last couple of minutes here, I really wish this conversation could keep going, because all of what you have said has just been so rich and beautiful, and I feel like there's so much more to talk about. But one question that I had for you personally, I know you said you started writing you'd been writing for 20 years before your first book had been published. So was How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accent, that was your first published book, right? Yeah. In 1991.
Well, I had a book of poems.
Okay.
Which was actually published when I was 34. And I think it was Grove Press. And I think they did 700 copies.
Oh, wow.
And it's a collector's item.
Yeah, but I'm sure it is.
It was my first book, and it just kind of never reviewed, never saw it in a bookstore. It just kind of, was not a publishing experience that was memorable. Yeah,
sure. Well, I'm curious. I mean, just thinking back from the beginning of your writing experience to present day, how has what you're writing about changed, if it has at all? Do you feel like, since you do have a bit of a larger platform now, have you noticed your writing change, or the subjects that you write about, has that changed at all, or your interests?
Well, again, with that pebble in the shoe idea, it's my interests and concerns have evolved. And so, it's always funny when someone quotes something I said 25 years ago, and I think, do I really think that anymore? Do I really have to, does it really have to be mine forever? And of course, with the internet, everything follows you forever, for as long as forever lasts. But so yeah, I think it's evolved. But certainly there are themes that even I can see come through in the books. I don't, Stephanie, I have to tell you that if I start thinking of, you have a larger platform, oh my gosh, I would be terrified to write. It's what I have to forget when I'm writing, because as I said before, there is no guarantee that you're going to be able to do it again. you have experience, you have craft, but there's a duende, there's a mystery you enter in storytelling, and you are not in control of that. You are in control of certain things, showing up. As Flannery O'Connor said, the muse doesn't come every day, but she knows that from 9 to 12, I'm waiting on her. So having that kind of, that you're in control of, you do have the craft, you do have to put in the time. I think you have to be passionate. It's got to be something that, you know, is worth all this trouble, but you have to start a beginner's mind, because that novel or that book, there's no recipe for it. You can't look it up in Julia Child. You can't look it up in Julia Alvarez. You have to, you make it up, and it's a messy process. That's one thing I can do to encourage, to say to writers. I used to think that real writers didn't have a messy process. That was only me. Come to find out, go to Brett Loaf Writers Conference. You'll find out this is how people write books, you know.
Yeah.
But
just from having interviewed authors before, I know that is a fact. It sounds like a very messy process, very emotional.
And, you know, if it seems like, well, some writers seem more able to do that in earlier drafts. I wager that what they've been doing, they're the type of writer that are writing in their heads a lot. So that by the time, you know, especially this happens with poetry, by the time they get it on paper, it's really gone through many drafts.
Oh, right.
Many drafts, you know. So I think that's another plug for the muse needing musing time, needing for you to turn off your devices and muse, because what you're musing, it's a form of writing and drafting and revising and trying things out. And it is part of writing.
Yeah. Well, yes, whatever process you're using, if that's what you do, it is working for you, because this book is beautiful. Okay, and your other books are beautiful.
No, Stephanie, no, it's not working until it's working. It's not that.
Well, one last question before we wrap up, unfortunately. What are you working on now? I know this hasn't been out too long, but is there something else that you're working on right now?
I'm working on things all the time.
All the time, yeah.
Because I'm working on it because as I tell Bill when I'm going to meditate, because I also have a meditation practice, I say, I'm gonna go take my meds because it's, for me, writing is a way, you know, how do I put this? I think the important thing, sometimes we focus so much on the product, and the product is the writing, the written book, the publication is the byproduct, but it's the ongoingness of the work that's important. The ongoingness of the work, the process, the practice. So I'm working, I returned to some of that material that I talked about before, Afterlife, that I was struggling with. But I've already got 2 other pebbles in my shoe.
Oh, great. I love to hear that.
No, what worries me, you know, I keep saying, what do I want? I want, before I go, that when you wring me dry, which is what Death, I think I was reading, I don't want any drops of stories to come out. I want them all told before I go. So I hope they don't keep, you know, putting pebbles in my shoe, or I'll never get through them.
You'll never finish. Well, I think we would be okay with that. But of course, I do understand what you're saying. So, well, so we did have somebody asking about when books will be available. So just to remind everybody, I'm going to pop the link in the chat one more time. Afterlife is in stock at both Bank Square and Savoy, I believe. So orders will be available to pick up in the next couple of days once we get those processed, hopefully tomorrow and Thursday. And then if you're not local, if you need it to be shipped out, we will also be shipping those out in the next couple of days as well. And Julia, I just want to confirm, did you sign book plates for us?
I did.
Okay,
That's
great.
why I'm surprised you didn't get them. But
Well,
maybe
so
they,
I think they may have arrived at Bank Square. So I work at Savoy. Bank Square is just a couple minutes down the road, and I'm not in that office, so I'm sure they have them if they were already sent. Oh, and somebody has chimed in and said that they received their book already and it had the book plate in it already. So book plates have arrived. We do have them.
I
I'm
remember
getting like live
I
updates here.
I have a memory of signing book plates.
Good, good. So they must be at Bank Square, which is why
Yeah.
I have not seen them yet, but I will be over at Bank Square probably on Thursday processing these orders. So we'll get those shipped out to you as soon as possible. And of course, thank you so much, Rick, over at the Day for
Rick,
participating in this. Yeah, these events are always a lot of fun.
Such a privilege, such a
Right.
privilege. Thank you both.
Yep, it goes 3 ways. Thank you for having me, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia. This has been a wonderful event. And again, it will be available on YouTube later on. And I think that's it. So thank you everybody for watching.
Thank
This has been
you.
great.
And I will
Have
keep
a
my
good
promise
night.
and try to get that book list. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Julia. All right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Have a great
Bye.
night.
Goodbye.